In many of the cult classic horror films that paved the way for the genre in the 80s and 90s, there exists a trope involving a babysitter being home alone and preyed upon. Of course, these films are works of fiction, but there are numerous mysteries out there that go to show that they often stray close to reality. In today's episode, we'll be exploring two nightmarish cold cases involving babysitters. Welcome to Voices in Panic and subscribe for new mysterious cases. Diane Henk. On January 6, 1954, 16-year-old Diane Henk called her 23-year-old friend Sherry and told her that she had a belated Christmas gift for her husband and wondered if she could bring it over. Sherry encouraged her to do so and invited her to stay for dinner, but told her to ask her mother's permission first. Diane's mother agreed to let her go and the teen went on her way. Sherry Fong, whose real name was Marjorie Lovell Fong, and her husband, Wei-Him Fong, who went by Wayne, had met the Lincoln High School student 3 years earlier in 1951 when they searched for a babysitter after moving to Portland, Oregon. The couple had one child together, and when they brought Diane into their lives, they quickly became close. Sherry, in particular, had taken a real shine to the teenager. The two exchanged lavish gifts, borrowed each other's clothing, and Diane would sometimes stay the night. Aged just 15, Diane had given birth to her own child. She often brought the baby, Catherine, with her and cared for both children at the same time. When Diane arrived at the Fong's residence, she discovered another couple. Mr. and Mrs. Jean Smalley were already there, having drinks with Sherry and Wayne. The pair knew Diane and greeted her warmly, but opted out of having dinner with the trio, leaving soon after. Mrs. Smalley would later recall that Diane consumed 2 martinis while they were there and was acting silly. By the time they left, there was reportedly evidence that the teenager had as many as 5 martinis that evening. 2 people spoke to Diane on the phone later that night. One of them was a friend of the 16-year-olds who later stated Diane's words were very blurrish. She said her friend told her they were having a party and that they were going to have dinner, and she said she was high. The second person who called Diane that night was her mother. At around 9:30 p.m., the two chatted, and the teenager informed her mother that Sherry had given her some vitamin capsules. Mrs. Henk told her daughter to return them. Diane said she would, but added, it would be kind of hard. You know how Sherry is. The two spoke again after 10 p.m. Diane reported that her hair was up in pin curls and she'd be home soon. However, an hour later, she called to tell her mother that Wayne had gone out and hadn't returned, and so she had no way of getting home. The pair agreed that it would be easier for her to stay the night with the Fong family, given how late it was. However, after this call, Diane vanished. The following day, Mrs. Henk called Sherry, who told her that her daughter had gotten on the bus at 8 a.m. She and Diane had retired to bed at around 11:30 p.m. the night before and had woken late. Although Sherry had offered the teenager a lift, Diane declined and said she would get the bus. But she never arrived at school and never came home. In fact, there was no trace of the teenager anywhere. The police were quick to jump into an investigation. The Fongs were the first to fall under suspicion, not only because they were the last people to see Diane alive, but also because they were a mixed-race couple, something that was seen as unusual at the time. And there was a local rumor that Wayne was involved in some shady business and had links to organized crime syndicates. He had pled guilty to a narcotics charge 6 years earlier. Detectives reportedly felt the couple was responsible for the supposed moral corruption of the teenager. Accusations, gossip, judgment, and racism clouded the case. Some people lost interest when they found out that Diane had a daughter outside of wedlock. Others simply held racist beliefs about Wayne Fong and perpetuated unsubstantiated rumors that said, from the outside, the situation was odd, even for 1954. Why was Sherry, a 23-year-old woman, so close to a 16-year-old schoolgirl? Why did the couple allow the teenager to stay the night? Why did they lavish her with pricey gifts? By today's standards, their actions appear very predatory. Following Diane's disappearance, Sherry placed a personal ad in the local paper, which read, "Diane, please contact me. Regardless of your present circumstances or anything you may have done, I'll help you all I can. Sherry." An undercover officer later stated their belief that the Fongs were being thrown to the wolves, that the team investigating the case were under pressure to solve it and close it, and they were looking for anyone they could pin the blame on. Several of the 16-year-old's classmates came forward after she went missing. One of them told the authorities that they'd seen her downtown on the day of her disappearance. Another reported bumping into her at a department store a few weeks later. However, none of the sightings could be verified. Another suspect in the case was Kenneth Martin, Diane's boyfriend and Catherine's father. Reportedly, he told the 16-year-old that he would kill her if he ever saw her with another boy. Understandably, Diane found this statement incredibly distressing. However, the evidence of his threats comes only from Sherry, who claims Diane told her this. She also stated the teenager was so distraught that she was suicidal. She said Diane once told her, "If he stands me up again, I'll kill myself." There were also allegations that Sherry told a bartender that the teenager had taken her own life, and that she had said to the police that Diane had contributed perhaps 75% to her own death. On February 26, Diane's body was found on a steep hill on the south side of Evergreen Highway in Clark County, Washington. She was wrapped in 2 blankets and a sheet and tied with rope. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn when she went round to the Fongs. There were curvy grips in her hair, which had been shaped into curls and held in place with the grips, and she was not wearing stockings or her shoes. Almost all of Diane's clothing looked intact, except for her bra, which was only partially fastened and had been moved up over her breasts. It was determined that she had died from barbiturate poisoning, or from the mixing of barbiturates and alcohol. The teenager had never been prescribed barbiturates. In the pocket of Diane's jumper, investigators found a small plastic medicine bottle. It was about 2/3 full. The capsules contained rubermin, commonly known as vitamin B12 and a multivitamin. Sherry had already told the police that the pills the 16-year-old had told her mother about were vitamins, so this appeared to line up. Forensics showed that black, straight, coarse hair was found on the inner surface of the blanket wrapped around Diane's body. Further examination of the strands showed that they belonged to someone of Asian ancestry. It was similar to a sample taken from Wayne Fong and another defendant who was later tried in court, Kwang Tin Yi. Forensics also revealed that on the outer blankets and on the back of Diane's underwear, there was a black, sooty material, similar to a substance found in the Fong's basement. Investigators later theorized the teenager was dragged across the basement floor, which is how she ended up with the soot on the back of her body. Adding to this was that Sherry reportedly told a married couple that her life was so fantastic. "I even found a body in my basement," or "there was a body in my basement." When they asked her to expand on this, she told them it will be in all the newspapers. A spot of blood was also found in the Fong's car, but it could not be determined whether it was human or not. Notably, 5 days after Diane went missing, Sherry reportedly had the car, including its trunk, washed and cleaned. The circumstantial evidence against the Fongs was compelling, and it seemed like new details were constantly coming to light with the discovery of Diane's body. A Filipino man who had once been employed by Wayne Fong, Pio Rigo, claimed Wayne had talked to him about a dead body in January of 1954, told him the body was in the car, and, quote, "He tell me to come help him." Reportedly, Wayne later told Rigo that he would kill him if he didn't keep his mouth shut. Soon, Sherry was brought in for questioning. She was interrogated for hours without breaks, and over the course of 16 hours provided the police with no useful information. Authorities used several strategies to attempt to get a confession, including having one of her friends question her involvement. But Sherry denied having anything to do with Diane's death. The police believed the Fongs had given the teenager barbiturates that killed her, but neither half of the couple would confess. Despite this, a grand jury indicted both Sherry and Wayne, as well as a third person, Kwang Tin Yi, who spent much of his time at the Fong's house and is believed to have been a business associate of Wayne's. At their first trial, Wayne and Sherry were found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by gas chamber. However, a judge overturned the verdict, asserting that the prosecution failed to provide anything more than circumstantial evidence. In subsequent trials, it was revealed that the Fongs were heavily involved in the Portland drug scene, and that Wayne in particular was an important part of a criminal organization. Sherry was tried again, but a mistrial was declared. She was convicted a third time, but again, this was overturned. She was tried for a fourth time, only to be acquitted. At some point between her third and fourth trials, she told a planted police informant that the Chinese syndicate wanted Diane dead for talking too much. She reportedly offered the syndicate $125,000 to leave the teenager alone. Wayne also ended up a free man, although in 1958 he was arrested and charged for dealing heroin. He pled guilty and was given 20 years behind bars, but was paroled after 12. Following his release, he immediately returned to Portland and a life of crime. He was convicted in 1973 of possession of heroin and cocaine and died accidentally in prison in 1976 after falling in the shower. Sherry Fong kept a low profile after her husband was sent to prison. Although she had been attending university when Diane died, she never completed her studies. In 1987, she agreed